Next question, Sean, comes in from Peter Wilson. He says, I wanted to inquire about your thoughts on using zero RB build in my 12-team home league this year. I have the 9th pick, starting rosters, 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and then 2 flexes, 1 tight end, 1 defense. He said, your influence has led me to go anchor RB in my home league last year to pretty good success. Lost to the Jonathan Taylor team in the championship. So this fits in, Sean, with the conversation we were having with the previous roster. I'm strongly considering going full zero RB this year. A few points in his favor. He said it's half-point PPR. Most league mates are heavy on running back in the draft, particularly in the early rounds, so wide receivers will drop. I tend to be a more informed drafter than the majority of the others in the league, who often rely on other websites, will just say, for their data. So good values later in the draft. He said he had a few hesitant situations, though, that may be not ideal for this. So short bench, only 6 spots and 2 IRs. And then it might be challenging to have enough wide receiver firepower on the bench, or a backup QB or a tight end, for example, while covering the late RBs as well. Seems like it might be something might need to give. And he said reserve standing on waivers rather than fab budget makes it harder to acquire RBs in season that are needed to compete. So he said last year he got lucky picking up Patterson and managed to trade for Eli Mitchell. Do you have any advice? This is probably a separate question, Sean. Do you have any advice for an anti-fragile drafter in this situation? I don't know if that means he means that he doesn't want to run running backs in this draft, or he wants to be anti-fragile in this draft, but thanks in advance. So that's from Peter Wilson. I mentioned it's great to hear where people are coming from and listening from. He mentions he's from London in the UK. So Sean, a number of things there. The flex spots give you the ability to start 4 wide receivers in this league. So you can have 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 4 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 defense. So it definitely would build up towards a zero RB build. There's half-point PPR, so similar to what we're trying to do at the FFPC. Obviously, any league that you're in where wide receivers will drop based on running backs going earlier can be beneficial for this as well. The short bench, though, can cause some issues, and then not having a waiver budget system, but rather basically priority to 1 team per week can make it a little bit trickier. Do you think 6 bench spots is enough when you're looking at these season-long leagues? Obviously, when we're in our FFPC, it is still relatively short benches in those as well. What's your thoughts overall on Peter's question here?
Yeah, I mean, this question is very well structured, because the elements that he notes are very important, right? And this 2-2-2 format plays quite a bit differently than a 2-3-1, and then a half PPR is going to play quite a bit different than a full PPR. And I think that one of the reasons that he mentioned that half PPR works in his favor is that there are still plenty of leagues that do use standard scoring. So half PPR is going to be much more favorable for the wide receivers than standard. And yet at the same time, it's much more favorable for the running backs than a full PPR is. And that's one of the things that we see when we look at the Win the Flex tool. And the cool thing there is that we have the half PPR data in from Underdog, so you can look at a similar format, and then you can make some changes, and you can contrast that to a full PPR format. Connor had a really good article recently helping to explain to Underdog drafters that because of that 3rd wide receiver slot and the requirement to fill that with a receiver, that it does change the dynamic significantly. And you can use the Win the Flex to manipulate your starting lineup. You can choose different options for the flex position, whether you want that to be a running back or a wide receiver. Based on Underdog ADP, it actually does push you in the direction of wanting to be somewhat running back heavy, because running backs are going to outscore relative to ADP. But in this league, if it's very running back heavy, because you don't have to start that 3rd wide receiver, right? You can be a 4 running back, 2 wide receiver format as well. So that's the other thing that we have to consider. If it becomes very running back heavy, then you're going to see that balance shift back to either being equal or in the favor of wide receivers. So your particular league trends are going to matter. And if it does kind of move back in the direction of being balanced, then I think that pushes you to either an anchor RB build or a zero RB build. Because even in half PPR, the other dynamics that we talk about for zero RB, this ability for you to hit on running backs who emerge and are the clear-cut starter and the clear-cut point scorer for their team in a different sort of dynamic than at the receiving position, and with obviously those injuries also being very high to the bell cows, then you can put together this team in half PPR that's dynamic. So I don't think that we can definitively answer the question, but we can look at the types of things that we're weighing. Now, Colin, you mentioned the bench spots. If you can't keep and sort of stash your running backs that you have taken because they're very, very talented and you like what they would do if they got a shot, that does make it trickier, right? I think that you can still get the benefit of having the wide receiver talent and depth in the starting lineup. And then it depends a lot on how your league is actually doing waivers. Can you wait and not make any waiver picks during the waiver time period and kind of preserve that priority until you need it and make a couple of moves at the key moment, and otherwise be adding in some running backs, once waivers are over, if it's into sort of a first come first serve free agency at that point. So those are some of the things that we deal with here. I think that going full zero RB would introduce additional risk that maybe isn't necessary in this particular league. And so I think maybe sticking with the approach from last season that was so successful might be my recommendation. But those are some of the things that we would be considering as we built out our tactics. And then just as well, who's actually available when you're on the clock at number 9, and then when it wraps around into the second round, how high are you on a DeAndre Swift? How high are you on a Saquon Barkley? Does Derrick Henry fall to that spot, and do you want him there? I mean, Zach and I just drafted Derrick Henry in the second round of one of our FFPC best ball leagues. And then in the Pros versus Joes that Ben and I did last night, Derrick Henry almost made it to us at the 209. And so, there are going to potentially be some options there that I think you want to be ready to take advantage of if they do pop up in your draft, as opposed to deciding 100% one way or another which direction you're going to go before the draft starts.
Yeah, and I think in this league that might make a lot of sense to have that kind of hero RB build, but take that running back in the second round, because if it is running back heavy through those opening picks, you may have a really good shot at getting one of those kind of top 3 wide receivers at that pick, and then having the opportunity, maybe as Shawn mentioned, with the likes of Swift or Barkley to get your running back there. And it also means that maybe not needing to try and stash as many running backs on the bench side of things there also. But